Finishing up chapter 3. And then we're going to get into 4 and 5. 4 is going to be real quick because it's just a recap of chapter 3 and we can kind of detail it. Then 5, he goes back to the same thing, and you might wonder to yourself, why has he repeated himself 5 times? Anybody thought that? I wondered why he basically said the same thing 5 times.
That's important. If you're telling somebody to do something, usually you gotta tell them several times.
Okay, and that's true. If you want to reinforce it, repeat it and repeat it. And, you look at your little grandson and say, that's not a really good idea, you shouldn't be doing it. And he ignores me, and so I look at him and say, now Reed, you're gonna get hurt, so stop doing it. And he obeys me for 10 minutes, and then he goes back to doing it again. I said, Reed, did you hear me? And so he quits doing it for 30 minutes and goes back to doing it. I walk in the living room, I say, Reed! And he quits doing it. Anybody else run into that?
Yeah.
That'd be about the time I slipped and got hurt.
Well, yeah, that's the way it ends up most of the time, because probably when we left and I came back to French Lake, he probably went back to doing it and he got hurt. And then it was like, this really hurts, I should listen. But I mean, how tough do you get on him? We chose the same path on 1,000 different situations, didn't we? Yeah. Okay, so, and another thing, in addition to what Jerry said, and that was a good response, but another thing, you gotta realize he's traveling around doing this, because they don't have internet, and the president can't get on the TV and talk to the whole nation. And he's writing this down as he goes, documenting what he did each time for our benefit 3,000 years later. And so he starts out in Bethlehem, and then he ends up in Jerusalem, and he has to repeat himself because they didn't hear what he said in Bethlehem. And then he's got to go up to Nazareth, and he's got to do it again and do it again, and he's just documenting the stubbornness of Israel is what he's doing. And he tried to be tactful, remember?
He's seen the same old thing everywhere he goes, too.
Yeah, same exact thing. And he tried to be tactful for, like Jerry said, when he started out in general, sin in general. Well, nobody listened. And then chapter 2, he spoke directly to Judea and Jerusalem. And now he gets personal, man to man. Now he's talking about the situation. So it may seem redundant, it may seem boring, but basically it's human nature. Sometimes we just won't listen until the whole world falls apart. And I don't know how much farther it has to fall apart before people start listening, but I guess we'll find out shortly. Okay, and number 2, general indictment. What's a general indictment in verse 11? I'll read it to you, you listen. Woe to the wicked, disaster is upon them. They will be paid back for what their hands have done. I can read that from here, that is great.
You get your glasses?
New glasses.
New glasses.
Okay, what's the indictment? Indictment is, you're wicked and you did it. Right? Woe to the wicked, they're going to be paid back for what their hands have done. And the bottom line is, when we finally come to grips with our situation, the first thing we kind of have to acknowledge is, I got myself here. Okay, and then he gets specific. So in verses 12 through 16, he addresses the individual categories of people. And the first people he addresses are the youth. Right? You suppress my people to all my people, your guides lead you astray, and they turn you from the path. the Lord takes his place in court and rises to judge the people. The Lord enters into oh, okay, we'll stop there. All right, so he's bringing judgment upon the people. But before he actually physically brings judgment upon the people, he lays down the specific indictment. The youth are out of control. I volunteered to student teach at the local high school in French Literature. And they kind of knew me from band and from Little League, and from Lions Club and whatever. And the principal said, well, we're probably not going to be doing that. We don't want to get sued and we don't want you in jail. Because, you know, I got to thinking about it and the guy was right. In a lot of situations, the youth are out of control. Now, not the kids in this church, but I don't know how you can be a teacher today and take some of the insults and take some of the orneriness of some of the kids today. I mean, basically, a lot of kids are raising themselves. They don't have any kind of a role model. They don't have, I was Little League practice one night. And we got to Little League practice and stepped out of the car, and a lot of kids were already out of the car and on the field, and a big crack of thunder hit. And I turned and looked to the west, and there was this huge thunderhead coming over the hill behind the hotel. And lightning was everywhere. It was. So I just yelled at everybody, get back in your cars. We're going to have to cancel this. That storm's about to hit. And so 3 or 4 of the cars had already left, so we loaded. Some of the other parents loaded them up, and I loaded one up. We're pulling out the parking lot, and there's this little kid in diapers who can't walk on his own quite yet because his little sister's got his hand, and she was probably 3. I'm pulling out of the parking lot, and I didn't recognize him, didn't have anything to do with my ball team, but I stopped and I said, where do you kids live? And he, the little girl pointed down toward Pluto. I said, sweetie, there aren't any houses down there. Where do you live? And she pointed down toward Pluto. And then it started to sprinkle. So you guys get in the, and my wife was in the truck with me, so I was protected. The social norm. And so I said, here, you guys got to get in the truck. I picked them up, I handed them to her, I jumped in, and it hit. Hail, everything. It hit. So I got my windshield wipers on, and we got out the edge of the parking lot. I said, can you show me where you live? And she said, yes. Nodded her head, and she pointed down toward Pluto. So I drove down, got down to Pluto, across from Huck's there, and I said, okay, now where? And she pointed out toward the light, and I turned up toward the light, and then she pointed down toward Kroger's. So I drove down toward Kroger's. And I get down just past Kroger's, and she points to the right of Russellville, which is that little patch of houses up on the hill above the West Baden Park. And so I drove down there, and she took me up that hill, and I get to the top of the hill, and I mean, it is roaring. The weather is roaring inside. So I get up there, and we sat in the truck for about 10 minutes, and it's slacked down. I jumped out, and I said, that house? She nodded yes, and I said, you hang on to them until I find out if this is the right house. So I ran up, and there's this party going on in the house. And I knocked on the door, and I knocked on the door, and nobody came, so I opened it, and it was loud. Opened the door, and I said, I need to speak to somebody, and I had to yell. And so some woman comes out, and she said, what's going on? I said, well, I've got your kids in the car. I said, do you have a little boy and a little girl? She said, yeah. I said, I got them in the car. She said, oh, thanks for bringing them home. So I went down and got them, and carried them up the hill. They joined the party. Those kids were racing themselves. They had walked over. They weren't even missed. Nobody even knew they were gone. And they were not old enough to be out on their. I don't even know how a kid that little could find her way home.
Just had to do it before.
She had to have done it many, many times, walk down to the park, played on the swings, and then walk back home. She had to have done it over and over and over. So he addresses the youth, and he says, you suppress my people. All right. Is that happening today anywhere? I know you can't find it in southern Indiana that prominently, but how about Chicago? All those kids that are killing, all those kids that are getting killed on Saturday night and Sunday night, Friday night, those are kids, and they're being killed by kids. Gangs recruit younger kids because the courts don't give them first sentences. And so they can go out and sell drugs and do anything they want, and the gang won't, and when they get to court, they kind of turn them loose. And the gangs take advantage of that because if the older guys in the gang go out and do it, they could end up in jail. But, you know, if the kids are not disciplined, and if they don't learn obedience at home, how are they ever going to know to be obedient to God? We set the example. We show them what's right, and sometimes we show them what's wrong. But it is our responsibility to raise our children up according to the implementation of the Scripture. So it kind of hits him there. He said, the youths oppress my people, and women rule over them. What's that mean?
Women came in charge.
Smack him.
Well, I can say
My
from
wife's
previous
not here.
experience, running my own household by myself, you know, I mean, the man takes off and does his own thing, leaves the woman there, what do you do?
That's the thing there, it says women rule over and doesn't say anything about the men, and that's because the men were absent.
Perfect, exactly right.
The men,
Now, in your situation, it was beyond your control. But in this situation, there's less than a 1% divorce rate. So if the women are having to take care of all the responsibility, where's the man? Go ahead. I cut you off, didn't I? Sorry.
the men were absent, either they'd gone off to war, got killed, fell over, or just decided they wanted to remain a boy.
It's the same thing, it's just what Jennifer said,
It's
he's avoiding responsibility.
He's avoiding the responsibility.
Exactly right.
Whenever a man refuses to grow up and be a man, he remains a boy. And some boys try and some boys don't. But it's the men that get it done. And that's the way it is.
And in some situations, they grow up to be more like a girl than a boy because that's the only pattern they see to go by.
And when men step back and let the women get it done, the women will step up and they'll get it done. Most of them. But that's not the way things were designed to work.
Right. No. Most guys, when you say, who influenced your life the most, they're gonna say dad or grandpa or the name of somebody that they looked up to. And if that person is not there and not available, then they do not have a pattern to follow. Okay? It's also prevalent in the churches today. Who does most of the work in the average church? Not this one. This is a very unique church. But in most churches, who gets most of the stuff done and makes most of the decisions? The women. Now, you've got to give them kudos for picking up the ball and running with it. Because they could have said, not my job. You're just gonna have to You're just gonna have to deal with the failure of this church, because the Bible doesn't say I'm supposed to be doing this. I'm supposed to be helping out the younger women and setting a pattern for them. I'm not supposed to have to be disciplining the kids and making all the decisions on the higher up. Now, I don't think there's anything wrong with women being a part of that, but God did not give that responsibility to the women. And it wasn't because they're not competent, it was because if he did, what would the men do? Well, what they ended up doing anyway, nothing.
Nothing. Nothing.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah. I was hoping to take a nap later today.
There was that.
Now I gotta cut wood. Way to go, Bill.
Well, Sunday's supposed to be
It
a
is.
day of
Day
rest.
of rest, right.
But if you got your toes stepped on, put on some shoes. Okay, who's the address next? $14. The Lord enters into judgment against the elders and the leaders of the people. It is you who have ruined my vineyard. The plunder from the poor is in your houses. What do you mean by crushing my people and grieving and grinding the faces of the poor, declares the Lord Almighty. The next people in charge are the elders. And typically, who would the elders be? In this situation, 100% of the time, who would the elders be?
The leader's the Pharisee. Leader's the Pharisee.
What gender? You're right.
Male.
Male. He's talking to the men. He's talking to the men. You have totally ignored your responsibility. You have dumped this on the kids, and you've dumped this on the women, and now, notice how stern he got with the children. He said, you're out of control, but he didn't lay any judgment on them. Now that he deals with the elders, and you're going to see, he gets real stern with judgment. Said, you have caused the country to fall apart. You have caused this train wreck, and you are going to pay for it. Probably the worst thing that would happen is they would see their kids struggle. You know, I can put up with a lot of stuff and keep my mouth shut. I know you don't believe that. But I can put up with a lot of stuff and keep my mouth shut if that's what's appropriate to do. But don't mess with my grandkids. And don't mess with my kids.
How about
Because
Janice?
I am not going to be
I
silent.
was thinking that too.
I said, how about Janice? I said, how about Janice? Can we have a crack at her?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I missed something there.
You said not
You
to
said
mess
no.
with your kids or your grandkids. Can we mess with Janice? You said don't mess with your kids or
Okay.
grandkids. Can we mess with Janice?
Well,
Can your wife?
Your
Can we
wife.
mess with your wife?
oh, we'll find that out in a minute.
Okay.
We're going to deal with the women then. Don't get ahead of me. So, you know, he looks at the men, he said, the country's falling apart, your kids are falling apart, your family's falling apart, because you're spending all night at the bar and sleeping in late in the morning and doing nothing. Outright. It's exactly what happened. If the men were not going to accept their responsibility for what they had been assigned to do, the whole structure is going to fall apart. I won't get personal about this. If I hadn't had a neighbor behind my house who was my surrogate father, I'd probably be dead with my 3 brothers right they didn't live to be, one lived to make it to 50. And their lives were a total train wreck. And well, I was sitting at my dad's funeral, and I was sitting there looking at this old man in this casket. And it was like, I don't even know why I'm here. I don't even know this guy. And I sat there, I have no idea what the preacher said at that funeral. But I sat there and I tried to remember something that my father had said to me in 18 years. And I remembered two things. And I'm not going to repeat either one of them in a Sunday school class. Now, Don Hannes lived right behind the house, and him and his wife, they needed a babysitter, so probably from the time I was 13 or 14, I got on the bus at their house because I spent the night with the kid. Don worked at night. Don worked second shift and got home at midnight. Well, I couldn't leave that house, and decided that when I got home he needed to sleep, so I guess. And then when I got up, just about time the bus got there, Joanne came back from working as a nurse in Coshocton, and she worked night shift at the hospital. And so then I went to school, and I spent, except for the summer, I spent almost all my time at Don and Joanna's. And if it hadn't been for Don and Joanna, I wouldn't probably not be teaching the Sunday school class today. I probably wouldn't even be alive. And my three younger brothers are proof positive that I'm not. There has to be that example set. There has to be that discipline. There has to be a general knowledge of what's right and wrong, or you're lost. You're not only lost as a spiritual person, you're lost as a citizen of the human race. And it's not going to end well for you. Okay, what else does it say? Elders and leaders, it is you who have ruined my vineyard. What's the vineyard? We're going to get to that in big time on verse 5, the Song of the Vineyard. But when he says vineyard, what's he talking about? Israel. Israel. Talking about Israel. Talking about his people. He's talking about that nation that he created. He said, you've ruined my vineyard. And later on, if you get into Proverbs, it says, without a vision, the people are lost. Who gives them the vision? The parents give the children the vision. The elders give the church the vision. And back then, the church was also the government. And so the church gave the nation the vision. And if the church wasn't giving them a glimmer of God, then they were giving them a glimmer of Satan and what he had in store. Because that's the only two places we can go. Those are the only two authorities on walking across the crust of this earth. Now we walk under the authority of God. We're his ambassadors. The rest of the world walks under the authority of Satan. And all authority comes from God's throne, even Satan's. He will not allow Satan to do anything more than he'll remember back in Job. He said, you can go this far, not a step farther. Now I'm sure that Satan's toes bumped the line. I'm sure Satan didn't leave an inch between the line and his big toe. He took everything God gave him, but he didn't go 1 inch farther. And we established that thing. All right. The Lord says, now he gets down to the women. Okay, you're about to have your All right. The women of Zion are haughty, walking along with outstretched necks, flirting with their eyes. tripping along with menacing steps and ornaments jingling on their ankles. Therefore the Lord will bring sores on their heads, and the women of Zion, the Lord will make their scalps bald. What's he saying? The women in this situation had a subordinate role, but they had a role. They were to set the example for the girls of the society. Who sets the example for the girls of our society in general?
Media.
Hmm?
Media.
Media?
Celebrities,
Hmm?
celebrities.
Celebrity.
Celebrities of all kinds,
Okay.
famous people.
Well,
Well, it's supposed to be their mothers, and
supposed to be their mothers, but who is setting it? Who is setting it?
well, sometimes it is their mothers. I mean, you know, it's to say sometimes their mothers
I said
aren't a good.
In general, a failing society, who's setting it?
Sometimes the women refuse to grow up too and stay girls,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, you're supposed to be their mother, not their friend. And do you know a mother that's more of a friend than a mother? Some situations where the mother doesn't want to hurt their feelings and, well, they're your kids, you want them to succeed or not. They have to be some discipline in their lives. Today, most of our society is, influenced by Hollywood. Hollywood gives us our concept of love. It's got to be exotic. It's got to be romantic. It's got to be such a good being around. It's got to be lustful. And you don't have to look at them, but look at the soap opera. I am ready to cancel Dish. We were going through, last week, we were going through some evening things. I turned on 911. Has anybody ever looked at 911? Everybody on there is of the gay community. You have a guy who's trying to be a woman. You have a woman who's trying to be a guy. You have two males that are romantic with each other. You have 4 females, and I just watched it 30 minutes. Well, I turned over to the Food Network channel. Have you seen it?
It's just as bad.
Worst cooks.
Oh yeah.
Got 2 transgenders on there, and the one ripped off her skirt because they told her attire wasn't appropriate. They told, I don't know if it's a him or a her or what it is. I think it's him trying to be a her.
White hair, short white hair.
They told her that her attire was inappropriate, that her clothes were flammable, that she was going to catch on fire. So she rips off her skirt. She's standing there in what I think they call a teddy, whatever a teddy is.
Oh, good grief.
I don't think it has anything to do with the teddy bear. But she's standing there in this outfit, and she puts on and the guy says, "Put on an apron." And so she puts on an apron, and they didn't black out anything. I can't even watch Food Network anymore. Hollywood is taking this country to the cesspool. It's not only a dirty drainage ditch anymore, we're in the cesspool. And I shudder to think how close we are to the end of God's patience in this country. If we turn our back on Israel, judgment's going to fall on this country, and it's going to fall like a sledgehammer. And we won't be taken care of, but even we are going to suffer because we haven't done what we should. We haven't stood up for what's right. We haven't demanded that our government make better decisions. If you go into the Bible, Second Chronicles 7:14, says, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways. You know, if you come back and look at that real closely, he's not talking to sinners. He's talking about if my people. Now, we're kind of exclusive to a point because we have one of the best churches I've ever been in my life, and I've attended 29 different churches regularly for some period of time. This is the best one I've ever been in. And so God's going to honor that. But I look back on the parts that I played, and I could have done better. Hey, Bruce.
Hi, Bruce.
What is it?
Yeah.
Right over there, sir. Help us out. Sausages, you'll love it. I could have done better. I should have done more. It doesn't want that on my lap.
Go get your desk.
That's a good idea.
And I think we all, if we want to come to grips with our situation, we all have to say, yeah, I could have. There are times when I could have been louder, I could have been more forceful, I could have said something to somebody, and made a better difference than I did. All right. Now, any in there, we'll finish this up. And that they will snatch away their finery, bangles and headbands, crescent necklaces, the earrings and the bracelets and the veils, the headdresses, the ankle chains, all their luxuries are going to be gone. Instead of fragrances, there will be a stench. Instead of a sash, there will be a rope. Instead of a well-dressed hair, faultless. Instead of fine clothing, sackcloth. Instead of beauty, branding. Your men will fall by the sword, their warriors in battle. The gates of Zion will lament and mourn. Destitute, she will sit on the ground. I'm going to say, it's all going to fall apart for you. You're going to lose all your luxuries. I was reading an account of just last year. I did a lot of reading, and COVID kind of gave us some extra time. But I was reading about how Israel came back home, and it started way back in 1867 when they came in and they surveyed the area. And when they did that, the guy that was doing the surveying was a Christian from England. And he couldn't wait to get to Jerusalem because he wanted to see God's city. And so they worked their way up from the south, and they got up to where they could see Jerusalem. And in 1867, Jerusalem was a total ruin. It had been a total ruin since it was taken over sometime in the 2nd century. There was nothing green. There was nothing to eat. The sheep were wandering in rogue herds. There were no shepherds. And when the people needed something to eat who were living there, which were basically Arabs at the time, when they were in the area, they would stay in some of the better buildings in Jerusalem, but then they'd pack up their camels and they'd move on. And they hunted sheep like we hunt deer. The sheep were just wild flocks wandering around. And it was that way until 1917. And in 1917, a proclamation was issued for Israel to have their land, have some of their land back, a little portion of their land. And when the Israelites started coming home in 1946, the land began to bloom again, but from the 200s until 2000, Israel was a wasteland, and Jerusalem was just a pile of dilapidated, run-down buildings. Now you go there and it's a thriving economy. But what does it say here? Everything it says here happened, and it happened for 2,000 years. God warned them. They didn't listen. They lost it. Okay, 4 will be real quick, and then we'll jump into 5. Ivy talks about his vineyard in detail. Remember, the vineyard is Israel. Okay.